So, good afternoon everyone. It's group 8 and we're going to discuss the hormone involved in regulating blood sugar and glucose tolerance test. Key organs for regulating blood glucose is small intestine, which where glucose was absorbed. Pancreas, it is the responsible for producing insulin beta cell and glucagon alpha cell. Liver is the one who stores and produces glucose, and muscles here is where the glucose is absorbed and store glycogen. So yes, Sir Magagan is going to discuss about the small intestine. So the small intestine, in addition of regulating postprandial blood glucose level by controlling the gastric emptying rate, the glucose was absorbed by the villi and microvilli. Each vilus transports nutrients to a network of capillaries and fine lymphatic vessels called lacteals close to its surface. So, kanang vilus kay na siya ginatawag nga tissue nga microvilli nga part sa epithelial cell. So, halos man sa tuano kay balo na sa anang epithelial cell kay tungod sa tong human anatomy nga subject. So kaning gastric emptying rate kay mao ni siya tong ang kaning atong stomach kay mo contract siya, then kani atong pyloric sphincter kay mo sphincter kay mo mo abre na siya mga pilar ka millimeter, din katod ang food nga gi kaon nimo kay ay nga na breakdown kay mo hinahinay siya push padulong sa duodenum, which is ang small intestine. So small intestine dito buhat tong tong pag-absorb sa mga nutrients sa glucose nila mga absorb na din ang glucose din padulong sa atong blood vessels and capillaries or sa atong lymph vessels. So pag humana na mo balik na sa din na siya mabalik na sa na siya kaning gastric mixing dito na sa din ma-breakdown na sa pag-ayo ang mga pagkaon sa tuntian din ayan mo balik na sa na siya ng gastric emptying where makontract na sa datong stomach para ang katong mga foods kay mapadulong sa atong small intestine. So that's all.
Hi, I am Tampi NCRP and I am about to discuss the small intestine. Small intestine is a tube-like organ that connects to the stomach and the large intestine. It is about 20 feet long and folds many times to fit inside the abdomen. The small intestine has the three parts: the duodenum, jejunum, and ileum. It helps to further digest food coming from the stomach. And in addition to regulating postprandial blood glucose level by controlling the gastric emptying rate, the glucose was absorbed by the villi and the microvilli, and each vilus transport nutrients to a network of capillaries and fine lymphatic vessels called lacteals close to its surface. And small intestine helps to further digest food coming from the stomach, and it absorbs nutrients like vitamins, minerals, carbohydrates, fats, and protein, and water from the food so they can be used by the body. And the small intestine is the part of the digestive systems. And what are the function of small intestine? The small intestine breaks down food from the stomach and absorb much of the nutrients from the food. And the duodenum is the first one of the small intestine. And the main role of the duodenum is to complete the first phase of digestion. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, especially to our beautiful teacher, Ma'am Alma Patria. I am Johara Lidasan, a second year student. So for today's video, I'm going to discuss the one organ regulating blood glucose, which is the liver. The liver converts glycogen back to glucose when it is needed for energy and regulate the amount of glucose circulating between meals. So as what we have discussed sa past discussion natin, no, glycogen is a glucose polysaccharide. So it is an important and quickly mobilized source of stored glucose. By storing glucose, our liver makes sure that the blood glucose levels remain steady between meals and during sleep. So when blood glucose falls, cells in the pancreas secrete glucagon. So when we say glucagon, guys, siya yung nag-instruct sa liver natin to convert glycogen to glucose, making glucose more available in the bloodstream. Since our liver is the one who stores and produces, while we are asleep at night, our liver releases glucose into the bloodstream and keeps us supplied until we breakfast. And the amount of glucose or sugar being used is matched doon sa amount of glucose na i-release ng liver natin. So that's why the blood sugar levels should remain constant, walang nagbabago. Kasi yun yung main function ng glycogen to maintain a physiological blood glucose concentration. So that's only my part, and the next organ that regulating blood glucose will be discussed by the next reporter. And thank you for listening. God bless and stay hydrated.
Hi and good afternoon everyone. By the way, I'm Jana Ampautin. Now we'll be discussing about the role of our muscle in the regulation of our blood sugar levels. So before I proceed to my main topic, let me just give you an overview on what muscle is. But of course, I know that all of you, or all of us rather, are already familiar on what muscle is. So what is muscle? Muscle, or our muscular system, is an organ system consisting of skeletal, the smooth, and the cardiac muscle. So its function is that it permits movement of our body. It also helps us to maintain our posture, and of course, muscle helps in the circulation of blood throughout our body. So, in relation to the regulating of our blood sugar, our muscle plays a notable role, especially in the response to an increase in our blood glucose. So, during the absorptive state and the regulation of our blood glucose level, an increase in our blood glucose is detected by the beta cells of our pancreatic islets. That causes them to increase the release of insulin into our blood. And then after the insulin was released, it stimulates cells, especially the adipose and the muscle cells, that helps to take up glucose from our blood. Then the insulin and the transport of glucose into the cells, but before or to enter cells, the glucose requires transmembrane transporters. And there is a family of this called the GLUT, or known as the glucose transporter. This GLUT is a wide group of membrane proteins that facilitate the transport of the glucose across the plasma membrane, which is a process known as the facilitated diffusion. And the most numerous of this is the GLUT4, or known as the insulin responding glucose transporter, which we can found on our muscle cells and on our fat cells. Then, when the insulin binds to the insulin receptor on our cell membrane, the cells are stimulated to increase the number of glucose transporters. And the more transporters are produced, the more glucose is transported into our cells. And by the way, not all tissues requires insulin to take up glucose. For example, is our brain and our liver cells. They uses GLUT transporters that are not dependent on insulin. The hormone also has other effects on our body's cells, and all of which contribute on our body's cells.
Good morning, everyone. Today I'm going to talk about homeostasis. So, what is homeostasis? Homeo means similar and statis means stable. So, first, let's talk about the normal blood sugar regulation. So, atong human body maintains constant levels of glucose throughout the day. So, after a meal, blood glucose levels rise as glucose is transported from the small intestine into bloodstream. So, in response to this, ang pancreas mo release siya of insulin into bloodstream, then where it acts as a hormone. So, what is hormone? Hormones are molecules that are made in one part of the body, secreted into bloodstream, and are transported to a distant part of the body, where they mediate an effect or reaction at a secondary target. Insulin. Insulin is a peptide hormone that is released by the pancreas in response to elevated levels of blood glucose. Also, it binds with high efficiency to receptor proteins on the surface of liver cells, where it turns on signaling within the liver to increase the uptake of glucose from the bloodstream. So, ang atong body cells, other body cells, such as skeletal muscle, adipose tissue, o brain cells are also activated na siya by insulin. When a molecule has multiple different effects in the body, these multiple effects are called pleiotropic effects. So, these other cell types will also take up glucose to use as an energy source. This lowers blood glucose levels back to normal levels. The liver can take up more glucose than other tissue types and convert into large carbohydrate molecule called glycogen. It is stored as this carbohydrate until glucose is needed, which it can be broken down to release back into bloodstream. Up to 10% of the volume in liver cells is in the form of glycogen. So as you can see, we have path 1 and path 2 in the image. So in the path 1, when blood sugar rises due to a meal, the pancreas senses the increase in blood glucose levels. In response, mo release siya og peptide hormone insulin. Insulin interacts with downstream target cells in the body. Apil na ang liver, muscle tissue, where it causes the uptake of glucose from the bloodstream into the cell. So, ang mga excess glucose is stored siya as a carbohydrate glycogen. This returns blood glucose levels back to normal. So, if it has been several hours of eating a main food like that, so in a path 2, blood glucose levels will begin to fall. This signals liver cells to break down glycogen into glucose monomers. The glucose can be released back into the bloodstream. In between meals or during times of fasting, the blood glucose levels begin to drop. This activates the pancreas to secrete a different hormone called glucagon. Glucagon signaling activates the liver to begin breaking down the glycogen storage molecule into free glucose. The glucose is then released back into bloodstream, increasing blood glucose levels. So, over the course of the day, blood glucose levels will fluctuate modestly around the homeostatic set point. As meals are eaten, this triggers a rise in blood glucose that is counteracted by the secretion of insulin. So, in between meals, the blood glucose levels fall and glucagon is released by the pancreas to signal to the liver to release glucose back into bloodstream. So,
This image illustrates glucose metabolism over the course of the day. Hemostasis may become imbalanced kung ang pancreas is overly stressed, making it unable to balance glucose metabolism, so this can lead to diabetes. So question, what happens if hemostasis fails? So, ang tanan organ systems of the body mo-work na siya together to maintain homeostasis of the organism. So, if ang hemostasis fails, death or disease may result. Why is hemostasis important? Hemostasis is very important because it maintains optimal conditions for enzyme action throughout the body as well as all cell function. So, it is the maintenance of a constant internal environment despite changes in internal and external condition.
So, glucose tolerance test. Overview. The glucose tolerance test, also known as the oral glucose tolerance test, measures your body response to sugar. The glucose tolerance test can be used to screen glucose tolerance test can be used to screen for type 2 diabetes. More commonly, modified version of the glucose tolerance test is used to diagnose gestational diabetes, a type of diabetes that developed during pregnancy. So why it's done? So the glucose tolerance test identifies abnormalities in the way your body handles glucose after a meal. Often before your fasting, blood glucose levels become abnormal. So sa every time nga magkuhan ka ning glucose tolerance test, kay kailangan ka 8 hours para mag-fasting. So magsugod ka gabi, padlong buntag, para paggabi dapat ay pagka kuan na kay unsa ni, basta magpakuan ka sa doktor, mao adto kag doktor, dapat sayo gyud para makuan din yung blood glucose sa gikan ka sa fasting. So normal persons nga walay diabetes kay ang ilang kuan blood glucose basta gikan sila fasting kay nasa 10 mg per deciliter. So ang sa kanang na diabetes kay na sa mga 126 mg per deciliter. Ang katong padulungay palag kuan ani impaired glucose tolerance test, which is kanang padulungay palag diabetes kay nala sila sa 110 to 126 mg per deciliter. So kani sila nga ka person kay murag nana sila mga kuan kanang cardiovascular disease, murag na bitaw padulungay na. So 1 hour after glucose administration nga kanang istala ng glucose tolerance test kay kuan man na unsa ni paimnon kag syrupy nga mura siya liquid nga murag kanang honey nga tamis kayo. Then after 1 hour kuhaan na sad kanlag blood para may balon nga pila imong kuhan blood glucose pag humagtay ka to. Then sa normal nga person kay nana sa 160 mg per deciliter. So kung diabetic ka, nana siya sa mga not prescribed diri kay tungod kanang dako gid lang blood glucose. So nana siya sa mga siguro 250 or 300 na bitaw. So sa impaired glucose tolerance test kay wala gyapon na lapas pag gyapon nag 200 ilaha. So after 2 hours kay na sad kag dugo para matest kung pila imong blood glucose sa imong lawas. So sa normal nga person after 2 hours kay nana siya sa 140 mg per deciliter. Then sa diabetic person kay nana siya sa mga 200 pataas milligrams per deciliter. So ang katong impaired glucose tolerance kay nana sila sa mga 140 or 199 mg per deciliter. So di gyud sila normal. So the risks associated with obtaining a blood sample are slight. After your blood is drawn, you may experience bruising or bleeding. You may also feel dizzy or lightheaded. In some cases, infection after your procedure is possible. So ang kuan gid pud nino kay basta kanang makakuan ka kaning basta mahutay ka ning glucose tolerance test kay nagi mang lagom imong kamot kay tungod na sig kuhag dugo or kanang usay kay dili pa mag blood clot kuha na sa dugo, so mag unsa ni mag ang kanang nagi possible nga magdugo siya basta sige kuhaan. So usay pod kay malipong o ang uban kay kanang napay possible nga magka infection. So how you prepare food and medication. It's important to eat and drink normally in the days leading up to the glucose tolerance test. Let your doctor know if you're ill or taking any medication, as these factors can affect the result of your test. So dapat dapat imo gingnan ng kuan doktor nga ay doc na ako kanang gihilantan ko or kanang ako ginatik nga medication kay kanang possible ungod pud siya nga maka change sa result na siya kuan nga maapektuhan ang result sa imong blood glucose. So next, so what do you expect? So before the procedure dapat magkuan yun ka tani mag study ka para makapasar ka sa test. Char lang, joke. So before the procedure, for 8 hours before the test, you won't be able to eat or drink anything. You might want to fast overnight and schedule the test for early the following morning. So sa para sa giyon ganyan, so mga 8 hours ka mag fasting para may balaan gyud kung pila ang normal blood glucose sa imong body. So during the procedure, the glucose tolerance test is done in several steps. When you arrive at your doctor's office or lab, a member of your healthcare team will take sample of blood from a vein in your arm. This blood sample will be used to measure your fasting blood glucose level. So as I told earlier nga the glucose tolerance test ay kanang katong 1 hour 2 hours, so kuhaan ka nagdugo. So first nimo kuha katong wala pa gid ka nakatake og sirupi, so mao tong mang uban kay mang kuan mang lagom ilang mga kamot, so or mga napay possible mag bleeding. Then okay. So type 2 diabetes. If you're being tested for type 2 diabetes, you will drink about 8 ounce or 237 millimeters of syrupy glucose solution containing 2.6 ounce or 75 grams of sugar. So katong giyon ganya nga murag honey mo to ilang kuan murag ginainom nga tamis kay siya nga kuan nga klase sa tubig. So para may balaan kung unsa murag imong body sa anang kuan kanang blood sugar ay anang kuan sugar. So 2 hours later your blood glucose level will be measured again. So again kuan na sad ka every 1 hour kay ilang magka ginakuan og kuan na dugo, so para may balan kung pila kanang unsa imong kuan blood glucose sa imong body. So gestational diabetes. The American College of Obstetrician and Gynecologists recommends performing a 1-hour blood glucose challenge test to screen for gestational diabetes. In low-risk pregnant women between 24 and 28 weeks of pregnancy, your doctor may recommend earlier screening if you're at increased risk of developing gestational diabetes. Risk factors may include gestational diabetes in earlier pregnancy, family history or diabetes, obesity, having a medical condition associated with the development of diabetes such as metabolic syndrome or polycystic ovary syndrome. So, if your doctor determines you're at risk or you have suspicious value on the 1-hour test, you may be advised to take a 3-hour glucose tolerance test. For that 3-hour test, you may be asked to come to the test fasting, not having anything to eat or drink for the previous 8 hours. Fasting blood sugar will be obtained. So para sa itong gingon na ganyan nga ipa-fasting ka lang 8 hours, aya kan lang kuan og dugo para may balaan kung pila gyud normal nga kuan blood glucose sa imong body. So you'll drink about 8 ounce or 236 millimeters of glucose solution containing 3.5 ounce or 100 grams of sugar. So your blood glucose level will be tested again 1, 2, and 3 hours after you drink the solution. After drinking the glucose solution, you'll likely need to remain in doctor's office or lab while you're waiting for your blood glucose level to be tested. So 3 hours ka magtagal sa kuano sa lab sa imong doktor para makuan lang mahuman lang ni nga kanang unsa ni test. After the procedure, after the glucose tolerance test, you can return to your usual activities immediately. Results of the oral glucose tolerance test are given in milligrams per deciliter or millimoles per liter. So, type 2 diabetes. If you're being tested for type 2 diabetes 2 hours after drinking the glucose solution, a normal blood glucose level is lower than 140 milligrams per deciliter. A blood glucose level between 140 and 199 milligrams per deciliter is considered impaired glucose tolerance test or pre-diabetes. If you have pre-diabetes, you're at risk of eventually developing type 2 diabetes. You're also at risk of developing heart disease even if you don't develop diabetes. So, para sa gingon kanya nga, basta impaired glucose tolerance ka kay possible nga magkakuan cardiovascular disease ka. So, balag wala pa kay diabetes tawon na. So, a blood glucose level of 200 milligrams per deciliter or higher may indicate diabetes. If the result of your glucose tolerance test indicates type 2 diabetes, your doctors may repeat the test on another day or use another blood test to confirm the diagnosis. Various factors can affect the accuracy of the glucose tolerance test, including illness, activity level, or certain medication. So, kani nga chart kay basta kaning kuan sky blue mo na siya igapakan nga hypoglycemia. So ubos sa 100 mo na ikuan nga hypoglycemia ka. Pag maabot na siya 100 or 110, so mo na siya ang normal nga blood glucose. So kanang kanang pula nga kuan line kay mo na siya gapasabot nga kanang sa taas-taas nagkamay mong blood glucose. So kaning mild, kaning green nga line kay mo na siya ikuan nga para sa nang impaired glucose, kanang mana sila mo ikuan kanang padulungay kanang pa-diabetes na gino kanang magkakuan na ng cardiovascular disease. So kaning severe kay mo na siya tong maabot na gitag 350 lang kuan blood glucose. So delikado na gini sila. So, gestational diabetes. If you're being tested for gestational diabetes, your doctor will consider the result of each blood glucose test. If your blood glucose level is higher than 140 mg per deciliter after the 1-hour test, your doctor will recommend the 3-hour test. If your blood glucose level is higher than 190 mg per deciliter after the 1-hour test, you'll be diagnosed with gestational diabetes. So, for the 3-hour test, a normal fasting blood glucose level is lower than 95 mg per deciliter. 1 hour after drinking the glucose solution, a normal blood glucose level is lower than 180 mg per deciliter. After 2 hours drinking the glucose solution, a normal blood glucose level is lower than 150 mg per deciliter. Then after 3 hours of drinking the glucose solution, a normal blood glucose level is lower than 140 mg per deciliter. If one of the result is higher than normal, you'll likely need to test again in 4 weeks. If 2 or more of the results are higher than normal, you'll be diagnosed with gestational diabetes. If you're diagnosed with gestational diabetes, you can prevent complication by carefully managing your blood glucose level throughout the rest of your pregnancy. So that's all. Thank you, ma'am.